Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're gonna be reviewing the album La Terra di Grandi Occhi by the band Calliope. Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog. Now, to be honest with you guys, the hour right now is around about 1 AM. I usually never record an album in this hour. Actually, I'm usually not awake at this hour, and not because I don't want to be awake this late at night, just because every single morning I have to wake up for something else. But as it so happens, I just have a free day tomorrow, so I can do whatever. And I was about to go to sleep, and I was like, you know what? I have the script. I can do the video. I feel kind of fine. I feel kind of, I don't know, rejuvenated by this nocturnal energies that I'm receiving. So I guess I'll make this video. So if I'm a bit off, excuse me for it. Anyway, I'll start rambling on. Here's some of my favorite bits from this album. So I must admit, I thought that there were more favorite bits from this album, but I guess I was just wrong. I kinda just made them up in my head. So firstly, to open up this review, I'd like to address a mistake that I made in yesterday's video. Yesterday when I concluded the video, I told you all that today we're gonna be listening to La Terra di Grandi Occhi by Massimo Berruti, and I was wrong. I just said Massimo Berruti, but in fact this is by Calliope, and Berruti is a part of this band. And so why did I say this mistake? Well, for some reason, Spotify considers this album as being a Berruti album and not a Calliope. I don't know why that is, and it just kind of got me confused. On the list it's written correctly, so it's just me doing some stupid things. Now, when I first took a look at this album, specifically at its cover and its title and the titles of its songs, I immediately noticed that this was an Italian prog album, and you can definitely tell by now I've learned to recognize these Italian names, and it did look quite Italian. And of course you have the cover, which is, you can't get really more Italian prog than this one. It just stands on the verge between like PFM and Maxophone with the aesthetic, so I knew this was a proper RPI. But what I did not know, or at least what I thought at the beginning, was that this album probably originates somewhere from the 70s and maybe even the early 80s, when in fact this album came out no other than in 1992. Now, just for some context for you all, while the most popular progressive rock album of that year is mostly considered to be High Risk by Angligard, this is a time when the prog world was infested by mainly progressive metal, and an album like this, Italian prog, was really out of anyone's reach at the time. But yeah, that's like the entire prog climate, I guess, of the time. But when it comes to Calliope, their story actually starts in 1989, when a person, a keyboardist specifically, called Renato Doro decided that he wanted to form a band, and for that band he took 4 other members to play the respective parts, you know, vocals, drums, guitar and bass, and he was on the keyboards. And the goal that he had in mind, and the goal that they shared together, was to create a band that created music that paid homage to the original classics of 70s prog. But when I say 70s prog, I don't mean Genesis and Yes and ELP, but instead I mean the greats of Italian prog, like of course PFM or Le Orme or Banco del Mutuo Soccorso. And the band would soon take their name of Calliope, of course taken from the Greek goddess of epic poetry. And after 3 years of working together, in 1992 the band released their debut album called La Terra di Grandi Occhi, which basically means the land of big eyes. And in keeping with the aesthetic of releasing something that is reminiscent of the 70s, this this one of course received a vinyl release too. Now yes, while we talk about this year in particular, we talk about Angligard and how they managed to create this retro prog that pays homage and sounds very much like the original 70s sound, but honestly Calliope are somewhat of unsung heroes in this story because they went to great length to actually make sure that their sound would also be quite reminiscent, if not even directly copying the original 70s sound. And of course, being a very keyboard-led band, they acquired themselves the holy trinity of keyboards, which are the Hammond organ, the Moog, and of course, how can you not, the Mellotron. Now, did this album actually rock the progressive rock world, at least in Italy? Well, it didn't, but it at least received enough positive reactions from peers around them, so they went on and created a second album, which was released in 1993, called Città de Frontiera, which basically means Frontier City. But this album was a bit different than their debut, because the band on this one decided to take a bit more of a contemporary approach, changing their sound maybe by just a bit to be more accessible, mainly for the unsuspecting listeners that would eventually maybe get into the progressive sound that these guys have posed. But unfortunately, it seems that this decision was a bit of a double-edged sword for them, because on the one hand they did tarnish their reputation as being this progressive rock band that tried to pay homage to the good old progressive rock times, but in another sense they also were not that accessible for people, so not a lot of new listeners came into their stuff. Now at the time, the band's vocalist Massimo Beruti decided that he wanted to part ways with the band, probably because he was understanding that this was not going in the right direction. So he left the band in 1994, basically leaving its founder Ronaldo Doro to take charge of creating, you know, whatever this band produced by this point. And well, Doro was just working on a solo album of his, and he decided to take these materials and instead turn them into a third Calliope album, which was released in 1995. But of course that album did not rock the world, it did not do that much, and from then on through the years of 1996 up until about 2000, the band was in a pretty tumultuous time. Their existence became quite futile as members started leaving the band, making their core ideology and identity quite unstable. But somehow, quite miraculously, the band did come out of this time and managed to move onwards to the point where they actually still exist today. But when it comes to releasing new material, this band has not released a studio album since 1995. But with that being said, if you are looking to listen to everything that Calliope does have to offer, there is one thing which I did not mention, and that's a compilation album from 2002 called Generations. And this one includes 7 tracks on it, with 6 of them basically being live performances of already existing tracks from their other albums, and 1 unreleased piece. Now the reason I'm even mentioning Generations, which is something that I don't often do because I usually just talk about the studio album discography of a band, and the reason I'm mentioning this one is because I've noticed a bit of an anomaly with this one. You see, this album has basically as many user ratings on the Prog archives as any of their other albums in their discography, yet this one seems to have a higher rating than any of their other albums. And at first this seemed kind of confusing to me. How was this compilation album better than any of their individual works? But then I've taken a look at its track list and suddenly it all became quite clear. You see, you remember when I told you at the beginning of this video that the main mission goal of this band of Calliope was to basically recreate that 70s Italian prog sound. Well, they definitely tried, but I never said that they succeeded. And when it comes to this debut album of theirs, while it might start off a bit progressive, it really just moves on to being hard rock at the best. And about 70% of it is just literally not that progressive, if at all. And it seems like they've lost all of their progressive capabilities. I have no idea why that is, honestly. Like, they start off pretty fine, maybe not my cup of prog, but prog indeed, but then they moved on to creating things which were so unoriginal, so non-progressive, and it's honestly even a bit hard to see them as the same band as they were in the beginning. And well, when it comes down to it, when trying to recreate the classic Italian prog sound, I think they kind of failed. If there is something that they managed to do was maybe to create some of that English progressive rock sound, and that's only at the start, but throughout the rest of this album it just seems like they're trying too hard. They're trying to be overly flamboyant, and in the process they're entirely missing the nuances that create the beauty that is RPI. And this brings me back to talking about this compilation album of theirs called Generations. Well, when I took a look at the track listing on that one, I noticed that I only knew 2 songs, and those 2 songs come from their debut album, and as it so happens, they are, at least subjectively to me, the 2 most progressive tracks on that album. So taking that logic and moving with it onwards, I would assume that that album, compilation album of Generations, is basically comprised of their most progressive materials, thus rendering it their most progressive album to date, and that also helps to explain why mostly people like that one over the others. So yeah, all in all, I do hold much appreciation to what this band was trying to achieve when it first formed, but honestly I think that they took some really uncalculated risks and took some really interesting turns that did not turn for their favor. But if there's one thing that really crippled Calliope, we have to be real, it was Calliope themselves. So as I hinted at the beginning of this video, this cover is very much reminiscent of what you might expect from a 70s Italian prog album cover. I don't know, it's something about the watercolor paintings and this almost amateurish looking logo that just plopped in the middle of this one, and the message of it, which there is no message, but in a different sense this album cover is also quite ambiguous. All of these things come together and create what I would consider a pretty defying Italian prog album cover art. And personally, I don't hold any strong opinions about this one. It's a pretty neutral cover to say the least, but honestly I do find some intrinsic beauty within it, and I think that it's lovely for what it is. So despite my slandering review of this one, I think I'm gonna be a bit too generous today and give this one a rating of 6 out of 10. But that's about it guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're gonna be listening to Images and Words by no other than Dream Theater. And stay tuned because again I have another guest to join me on tomorrow's episode. I know it's crazy, so many guests recently, I'm so happy about it. But yeah, anyway, I'd like to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Warner, Wrist of Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it guys, have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye guys.